He laughed at his wife every night for kneeling before a small statue of Mary, until the night their son stopped breathing in the back seat of their truck. There was a time when Daniel Mercer used to laugh every single night at the same thing. Not politics, not television, not the price of gas. He laughed at his wife kneeling by the blue velvet chair in the corner of their bedroom, her fingers moving bead by bead through an old rosary that had belonged to her mother. He laughed at the candle. He laughed at the little statue of Mary she kept on the dresser. And most of all, he laughed at the silence. Because to Daniel, silence was useless. He was a contractor from outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. 42, broad shoulders, quick temper. The kind of man who fixed a broken sink with his bare hands and thought prayer was what people turned to when they were too weak to solve their own problems. His wife, Elena, was the opposite. Soft-spoken, steady. The kind of woman who prayed before opening hospital bills, who whispered Hail Marys while folding laundry, who touched the small silver medal around her neck whenever bad news arrived. She did not argue much. She did not try to force faith on him. She simply believed. And for years, Daniel treated that belief like a harmless little habit. Then life got harder. Hard enough to turn harmless things into targets. Their 10-year-old son, Noah, had been diagnosed with a heart condition 2 years earlier. The doctors called it manageable at first. Medication, monitoring, lifestyle changes. But manageable became fragile, and fragile became frightening. Some days Noah could laugh, run, and almost seem like every other boy. Other days his lips turned pale after walking up a flight of stairs. Bills piled up. Daniel's biggest renovation job collapsed after a client backed out. Then the company truck transmission failed. Then the insurance stopped covering one of Noah's medications. Then Daniel found out the bank had sent the second warning notice. Everything in the house became tight. Tight voices, tight shoulders, tight smiles at the dinner table. And in that pressure, Daniel's contempt for Elena's devotion deepened. He began saying things he had no right to say. Maybe Mary can pay the electric bill. Maybe your candles can fix Noah's heart. Maybe if you spent half as much time looking at the budget as you do staring at that statue, we'd be okay. Elena never answered in anger. That made him even worse. One Tuesday night, after an argument over a pharmacy charge, Daniel walked into their bedroom and found Elena kneeling again. The room was dim except for the candle flame beside the little statue of Mary. The old blue rosary slipped gently through her fingers. Her lips moved in almost complete silence. Daniel stood in the doorway, exhausted, humiliated by unpaid bills, furious at a world he could not control. And something ugly in him snapped. He walked straight to the dresser. Elena looked up too late. He picked up the statue. It was not large. Maybe 10 inches high, white ceramic with faded pale blue paint around the veil. The kind of religious statue that might sit in a grandmother's hallway for 30 years. One hand open, head bowed, face calm. Daniel held it up with a bitter smile. "This," he said, "this is what you think is helping us?" Elena rose to her feet so fast the rosary slid from her hand. "Daniel, don't." But he was already at the bedroom door. "Daniel, please." So, he turned back once, eyes blazing with that special anger that comes when a man feels powerless and wants to destroy the one thing someone else still believes in. "It's a statue, Elena, just a statue." Then he walked outside, across the back porch, and hurled it into the darkness beyond the fence. The sound that followed was small. A crack. A hard ceramic break against stone. Nothing supernatural happened. No. Thunder. No voice. Just Elena standing in the bedroom doorway with tears in her eyes, one hand pressed to her mouth, as if he had not thrown a decoration into the yard, but had struck something sacred in her. Daniel waited for her to scream. She did not. She only whispered, "You don't understand what you just did." He gave a cold laugh. "You're right. I don't." That night they slept facing opposite directions. The next morning, Elena did not mention the statue. She left early to take Noah to a cardiology follow-up. Daniel told himself the whole thing was stupid, childish. The house needed money, not religious grief. He had work to do. But when he stepped into the backyard later that afternoon, he noticed something strange. He found the broken statue pieces near the old stone border by the fence. Head separated from body, one hand chipped off, blue paint scratched. Yet the face, Mary's face, had landed upward in the dirt, almost untouched. And what bothered him was not the damage. It was the expression. The thing still looked calm. Ridiculously calm. Daniel cursed under his breath, scooped the broken pieces into a cardboard box, and shoved them into the garage behind paint cans and extension cords. He decided he would replace it later with another cheap statue from some religious gift shop, just to end the tension. Problem solved. At least that was what he thought. The first sign that something had shifted came 2 nights later. Noah woke up, struggling to breathe. Not gasping wildly. Worse. Quietly. Like the body was simply giving up. Daniel found him sitting upright in bed, pale, damp with sweat, his small hand pressed to the center of his chest. Elena. His wife was there in seconds. They were in the truck within 3 minutes. Daniel drove through dark streets with one hand on the wheel and one hand reaching back toward Noah every few seconds, as though touch alone could keep the boy alive. In the back seat, Elena prayed in a whisper, so soft it was almost hidden beneath the engine. Hail Mary, full of grace. Daniel wanted to tell her to stop. He wanted noise, instructions, control, but he said nothing. The ER was fluorescent and cold and endlessly slow in the worst possible way. Nurses moved fast but spoke in measured tones. Machines beeped. Shoes squeaked across polished floors. A television in the waiting area played a morning news segment no one was watching. After tests and scans and more waiting, a doctor finally pulled them into a private consultation room. There are rooms that tell you bad news before a word is spoken. This was one of them. The doctor sat down. Elena gripped the edge of her chair. Daniel crossed his arms too tightly. There's been a progression, the doctor said carefully. More than we expected. Noah's condition is no longer as stable as it appeared last month. Daniel stared. What does that mean? The doctor inhaled. It means we need to move much faster. He may need a surgical intervention sooner than anyone hoped. Elena's face went colorless. Daniel leaned forward. Sooner how? Days. Maybe a week or 2. But if another episode happens, sooner than that. The world did not collapse. That is not how terror usually works. It narrows. It narrows the room until the doctor's face becomes too sharp. It narrows the sound until the air conditioner hum becomes unbearable. It narrows the future until all you can see is one child in one hospital bed. Daniel heard the rest like someone underwater. Transfer possibilities, surgical consult, risk profiles, monitoring, a specialist team in Dallas, insurance complications, even now, even here. On the drive home, Noah slept in the back seat under the weight of medication. Elena looked out the window. Daniel drove in silence for 15 miles before finally saying, "We'll figure it out." It was the sort of sentence men say when they have no idea how. That evening, Elena went into the bedroom and knelt by the empty space on the dresser where the statue had once stood. The candle was there. The rosary was there. The dust outline of the statue was there, but the statue was gone. Daniel stood in the doorway again, suddenly aware of the absence like a missing person in the room. Elena did not turn around. She just began to pray. Not louder than usual, but with a kind of broken steadiness that felt stronger than shouting. Daniel backed away. For the first time in years, he did not mock her. He could not. Because somewhere under the fear, another feeling had begun to grow. Not belief. Not yet. But discomfort. The kind that enters a man when he realizes he may have broken something he doesn't understand. The next day, Daniel drove to 3 places looking for a replacement statue. A Catholic bookstore near downtown. Closed. A gift shop attached to a church. No Marian statues in stock. A large religious supply warehouse, 40 minutes away. They had one left, but it was far too large and expensive. He almost bought it anyway. But a call from the hospital interrupted him. The specialist's office wanted more records. Insurance was delaying pre-authorization. There was confusion over imaging transfers. By the time he got home, tired and empty-handed, the garage felt unbearably hot. He stood there for a long time looking at the cardboard box with the broken pieces. Then he pulled it down and opened it. For some reason, he expected it to smell like dust. Instead, he smelled roses. Faint, brief, gone in a second. Daniel froze. He looked around the garage. Paint thinner, old wood, motor oil, drywall dust. No flowers. No air freshener. Nothing. He shut the box hard and walked back into the house without taking the pieces out. At dinner, Noah barely touched his food. Elena tried to smile for him. Daniel watched them both and felt a pressure building in his chest that had nothing to do with medicine. That night he could not sleep. At 2:13 a.m., he got up for water and passed Noah's room. The door was half open. He stopped because he heard his son talking. Not loudly, softly, sleepily, as if answering someone. Daniel stood very still. Noah said, "Okay." Then after a pause, "Tell Mom not to cry." Daniel pushed the door open. The room was dark except for the glow of a nightlight shaped like a moon. Noah was asleep. His breathing was steady. There was no one else in the room. Daniel approached the bed. "Noah?" The boy did not wake. Daniel backed out, skin cold. In the morning, he told himself it was dreaming. Medication. Stress. Kids say strange things. Half asleep. He mentioned none of it. Then came Friday. The hospital called at 9:20 a.m. They had a cancellation in Dallas. Noah needed to be admitted earlier than expected for surgical prep and evaluation. They wanted him there by evening. Everything became movement. Bags, documents, chargers, pill bottles, insurance cards, snacks no one ate. Daniel drove. Elena sat beside Noah in the back this time. Rain fell in long gray sheets across the highway. About 90 miles into the drive, traffic slowed almost to a crawl. Accident ahead. Emergency vehicles. Red lights reflected across wet asphalt. Noah had gone strangely quiet. Daniel checked the rearview mirror. Too quiet. Elena? She leaned over him and looked up, her voice suddenly sharp with terror. Daniel. Noah's eyes were half open but unfocused. His lips had turned that awful color again. Everything inside Daniel lurched. Cars were bumper to bumper. Shoulder blocked. Sirens ahead, but not for them. "Call 911, he said. Elena already had. The operator asked questions that felt impossible to answer in time. Then Noah made a small sound, barely anything, and his body sagged against the seatbelt. What happened next would live in Daniel Mercer's mind for the rest of his life. Not because it was flashy, because it was impossible to explain in the order things happened. A woman appeared at Daniel's driver's side window, not running from another car, not emerging from the accident line, simply there. And, umbrella-less in heavy rain, blue coat, dark hair tucked back, calm face. She tapped once on the glass. Daniel lowered it halfway without even thinking, desperate, wild. "There's a frontage road to your right," she said. Her voice was clear and steady. "Take it now. Ambulance access is blocked ahead. There's a small emergency clinic less than 2 miles east." Daniel looked to the right. There was no visible road, just guardrail and rain and confusion. "I can't." "Take it now," she said again, firmer this time. "Your son doesn't have time." Then she stepped back. Daniel jerked his head toward Elena. "Did you hear that?" "Yes." He put the truck in motion, half on instinct, half in panic, edging toward what looked like a break in the barrier farther ahead. Another driver, without being asked, suddenly waved him through. Then another. In less than 30 seconds, Daniel found the narrow service turnoff he somehow had not seen before. He took it. The road curved behind a row of storage buildings in an empty field. Rain hammered the windshield. "Stay with me, buddy," Daniel said, though he did not know if Noah could hear. Then, as if dropped into existence from nowhere, they saw it. A low brick urgent care clinic. Small, almost hidden. One lit red sign. 2 staff members were already at the entrance with a wheelchair and emergency bag. Daniel slammed into park before the truck fully stopped. "How did they know?" he shouted. No one answered. Everything after that happened in fragments. Hands lifting Noah. Oxygen. A nurse saying, "Pulse is weak." A physician barking for transfer coordination. Elena crying openly now, one hand locked around the rosary in her pocket. Daniel turned back toward the road, toward the rain, searching for the woman in blue. There was no one there. No car. No figure. Nothing but water streaming down the pavement. The clinic stabilized Noah just long enough for a transport team to reroute him to a cardiac unit that had been alerted before they arrived. Before they arrived, Daniel kept repeating that phrase in his mind. At midnight, Noah lay in a hospital room attached to more wires than any child should ever see. Elena sat beside the bed, whispering prayers. Daniel stood by the window, hands shaking. When the cardiologist finally came in, exhausted but direct, he said the episode had been severe. Another delay on the highway might have cost them their son. Might have. Daniel nodded once, then asked the question that had been burning through him for hours. How did that clinic know we were coming? The doctor frowned. I'm sorry? The urgent care. They were at the door. Ready. The doctor looked down at the chart. They received a call from dispatch, I assume. We were still on the frontage road. That would be my assumption. But his tone said he wasn't certain. Later, Elena stepped out to call her sister. Daniel remained alone with Noah. The room hummed with machine sounds. His son slept. And there, on the bedside table, lay Elena's rosary. The same old blue rosary. Without thinking, Daniel picked it up. The beads were warmer than he expected. He turned them over once, awkwardly, like a man handling an object from a world he had spent years insulting. His hands were rough, too big for the delicacy of it. He stared at the crucifix, then at Noah, then at the empty chair where Elena had been sitting. And for the first time in his adult life, Daniel Mercer prayed. Not well, not eloquently, not with religious confidence. He prayed like a drowning man coughs air. Mary. The word felt foreign. He swallowed. I don't know how to do this. Silence. He looked down at the beads again. If you are listening, if any of this is real, help my son. His voice cracked hard on the word son. I was wrong. He shut his eyes. I was cruel. I know that now. The machine beside Noah gave a steady beep. Daniel pressed the beads into his fist. Please. That was all. Just please. A single broken word from a man who had once mocked other people for needing heaven. When Elena returned, she stopped in the doorway. Daniel was still sitting there, rosary in hand, head bowed. She did not speak. She only cried quietly and crossed the room, placing one hand on his shoulder. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. No swelling music. No speech. Just one hand on one shoulder in one hospital room where pride had finally run out of breath. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. The hours before dawn felt endless. At 5:40 a.m., Noah woke for a moment, looked at both of them, and said, It's okay. The lady said I'm not alone. Daniel felt the blood leave his face. Elena leaned close. What lady, sweetheart? Noah blinked slowly. The beautiful one. Then he fell asleep again. Elena and Daniel stared at each other across the bed. Neither said a word. Surgery lasted 4 hours and 18 minutes. Every minute was a country. Daniel paced, sat, stood, paced again. He said the rosary badly, then tried again, then simply held the beads and repeated Hail Mary under his breath with Elena until the words stopped sounding like someone else's language and became the only structure holding him together. At one point, he walked into the hospital chapel by himself. There was a small statue of Mary near the side wall. Simple, blue veil, open hand, calm face. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he sat in the last pew and wept without trying to hide it. Not because he was weak, because every wall inside him had cracked open. He wept for the things he had said, for the contempt, for the nights he had stood in doorways like a judge of mysteries too deep for him. He wept because somewhere between the broken statue in the backyard and the rosary in his fist, he had realized a truth that would shame and save him at the same time. Elena had not been kneeling before weakness. She had been kneeling in strength. She had been carrying faith for their whole house while he mistook control for courage. When the surgeon finally entered the waiting room, Daniel knew the answer before the man spoke. Not from words, from the softness in his face. The procedure went well, the surgeon said. There were moments of concern, but he did very well. Elena covered her mouth and sobbed. Daniel sat down because his legs nearly failed him. There's still recovery ahead, the surgeon continued. But this was the outcome we hoped for. Outcome we hoped for. Not guaranteed. Hoped for. Daniel bowed his head. His lips moved. Thank you. 3 days later, they returned home. Noah was weak but stable. The house felt different. Not magically fixed. Bills still existed. Work still needed work. Fear had not vanished entirely. But peace had entered the rooms in a way Daniel could not explain. That afternoon, while Elena helped Noah settle into bed, Daniel walked into the garage and pulled down the old cardboard box. He carried it outside. Then, piece by piece, he laid the broken statue on the patio table. Head, hand, body, blue chip fragments. He stared at them for a long time. Then he drove to a restoration shop in town run by an elderly Italian man who repaired ceramic figurines, clocks, frames, and whatever else people could not bear to throw away. The man lifted the statue pieces gently. "This meant something to someone," he said. Daniel nodded. "Yeah. Your mother's? My wife's." The old man looked at him over his glasses. "Ah." Daniel almost smiled despite himself. "Can you fix it? Can you fix it?" The man turned the pieces in his hands. "Yes," he said, "but the cracks will still exist." Daniel looked at the broken face of Mary, still unnervingly calm. "That's okay," he said softly. "So do mine." A week later, the statue came home. Restored. Not perfect. If you knew where to look, you could still see the fine lines where it had once been shattered. Daniel placed it himself on the bedroom dresser. Elena stood behind him, silent. When he stepped back, she touched the edge of the statue with trembling fingers. "You fixed it." He shook his head. "Not really." Then after a pause, "But I wanted it home." Elena cried then, openly. The way people cry when something much deeper than an object has been returned. That night, for the first time, when Elena knelt to pray, Daniel knelt beside her. Awkwardly. Stiff knees, rough hands, unsure rhythm. But beside her, the candle glowed softly. The statue stood with its repaired cracks. The blue rosary moved through both their fingers. And Daniel, the man who once laughed from the doorway, now bowed his head and whispered each prayer like a man learning how to breathe again. Weeks passed. Noah's recovery continued better than expected. Daniel picked up smaller jobs and then, unexpectedly, one of his old clients called back with a major contract that helped stabilize their finances. The bank gave them time. The medication issue was resolved through an assistance program Elena had applied for months earlier without telling him because she didn't want to raise false hope. Little by little, life returned. But Daniel never forgot the woman in blue on the highway. He asked about her. He called the clinic later and described her. No staff member matched the description. He checked whether any bystander had been reported helping redirect vehicles. Nothing. He even drove back to the site weeks later and realized that from the angle where traffic had trapped them, the service road should have been nearly impossible to notice in that rain. And yet she had known. One Sunday, after Mass, the first Mass Daniel had attended in over 15 years, he and Elena stood outside the parish doors, while Noah, still thinner than before but smiling again, talked with another boy near the steps. An elderly woman from the parish approached Elena and greeted her warmly. Then she turned to Daniel and said, "You're the husband." Daniel smiled politely. "That obvious?" She looked at him a moment longer than strangers usually do. Then she said, "Sometimes heaven reaches the stubborn ones in the most tender ways." Daniel stared. Before he could answer, she pressed a small prayer card into his hand and walked away into the crowd. On the front was an image of Mary in a deep blue mantle. On the back were the words, "Pray when you can, pray when you can't, and when all you have is one word, heaven hears that too." Daniel closed his fist around the card. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked toward the church doors, toward the candlelight just visible inside, toward the long road that had brought him from mockery to mercy. And very quietly, in the bright Oklahoma morning, he whispered the prayer that had become the truest sentence he knew. "Hail Mary, full of grace,